mainly the content of my presentation. I will start with fundamental questions and I will share it with you, and then I will do a bit of conceptual inquiry, and then I will shed light on my own interpretation of the phenomena of Islamophobia and how this is related to a new term that I've coined myself, which is the notion of Moscophobia, the fear from mosques. And then I will talk about some regional and global cases regarding the contemporary design of mosques. And then, as I said, I will end up with more questions. Let me share with you how the whole notion of our relation to Islamic architecture, and particularly the design of mosques, started. I do have consistent encounters with museums of Islamic art. I do visit a lot of museums of Islamic art. And whenever I go to a museum of Islamic art, two major questions, two major observations pop up in front of my eyes. One is related to, are we frozen in a specific time frame? Why Islamic art and creativity is related to a specific historical time frame. The contemporary moment is not included. And this would lead me to my second observation. Do we belong to the contemporary discourse? Do we have any contribution in the contemporary discourse? And then also I was trying to contemplate a bit on the beauty of Quran when it comes to the relation between us and mosques. Interestingly, in Surah Al-Tawbah, you will notice that it's not about rituals. It's not about going to the mosque, but how your own spiritual experience would dramatically, substantially change because of this encounter, because of this connectivity between you and the place. Another interesting question or another interesting conceptual inquiry is related to the whole notion of identity, because we keep on relating the whole notion of Islam with identity. So in some situation, whatever is not related to Islam is not part of our identity. And if Islam is seen from a historical perspective, so our identity also is kind of frozen in time. And to me also this is a big question mark. So would it be possible to see that identity is not a product, it's more like a process? So every single act that we do now in our own time is adding to our identity. And therefore, even when we talk about identity from historical perspective, which history we're talking about? Which chapter we're talking about? Who would choose this? Who would select that this specific building is representing our identity and the other one is not? And if I will take this argument and relate it to the context here in Qatar, for instance, I would question which of those buildings is part of the identity of Qatar. Because some of them are historical, but some of them also are contemporary. And they are adding to the identity of Qatar, they are adding to the identity of the locals and the identity of the expats. So in this case, this tapestry of buildings and spaces and places is dynamically added to the evolving identity of the country and the place. Another very interesting thing about designing mosques and contemplating and reflecting on mosques, the notion of old or new. If we are dealing with mosques from a very stylistic perspective, if we have specific standard visual expressions that would suggest that this is a mosque. Now in this case, it would be very hard for us to define which is new and which is old. This is a very interesting example of Masjid al-Sultan Hassan in front of Masjid al-Rifai. You have decades in terms of the difference of the time construction. But yet, if we keep on looking at mosques from very specific visual elements represented in a very strict manner, the element of time would disappear. It would be very hard for us to know what is the date of this specific mosque, because it's exactly the same visual message, it's exactly the same components, exactly the same facade treatment, spatial composition, and so on and so forth. So the notion of old and new is becoming also relevant to the discussion. I did a lot of research trying to find how people interpret the notion of the mosque in different places around the world. And I saw those two great examples of not really focusing that much on the notion of the minaret or the notion of the dome, but it was the metaphor of salvation, the metaphor of the ship. One of them actually in Indonesia called Mosque Nuh, the ship, which is again suggesting the notion of salvation. But what was interesting in the two examples, that the two mosques suddenly became kind of public spaces. People go there to have fun. People are allowed to go on all different levels of the mosque, including the roof. Kids are there. There's a small garden kind of connected to the place. So suddenly the sacred place is becoming kind of community place. I don't know about that. This is also very interesting observation to look at and to reflect on it. How the mosque can be transformed into a place for people. Very interesting art installation that was done by a Saudi artist who participated in Vancouver Biennale in the 2018. And he called his art installation Paradise Has Many Gates. And his main idea, as one of the people that experienced the place said, here, this is a mosque made of fences, it's like a cage. And his point of view was exactly that it seems in some situation that the mosque is like, we are trapped within its spaces, and also because how people are looking toward us, so we are in the situation of we are accused, we are, people look at us from a very suspicious point of view. But then, on the other hand, the way I looked at this art installation is related to the notion of transparency. With all my due respect to the intention of the artist, which is beautiful, but also the beauty of the art is in your ability to read it in different ways, in different manners, and like the postmodernism slogan, the death of the author. So if the author is dead, then it's absolutely your responsibility to interpret the artwork the way you see it. And the way I saw this artwork is related to the notion of transparency. How the mosque can be a space in a way that it would create visual dialogue with the people around it, with the context within this mosque is allocated. And by doing that, you might give a very positive message about what is happening within the boundaries of the mosque. Interestingly, if you go through different major references related to architecture and architectural history, you would realize that Islamic architecture is seen as a phase in history, which is supporting the notion that I started my presentation with regarding my reflections in the museums of Islamic art. It's a paradigm, it's an era, it's from year this to year this. But nothing is related to our contemporary time, as if even architectural historians and architectural writers are supporting the fact that Islamic architecture was related to a specific time, but those Muslims were not able to produce contemporary creative work. So in one reading, you will see this as documentation. documentation of our heritage, but on the other hand, it's also an accusation. Why we were not able to do cultural continuity. Not only that, look at this beautiful example. An interesting book called An Illustrated History of Islamic Architecture. And the book is promising the reader that would take you into a fascinating survey of the glorious architectural achievements of the Islamic world. And they keep on talking about beautiful examples in Turkey, Iran, Isfahan, Uzbekistan, and so on and so forth. And then when they reach the contemporary moment, they said, and today's modern Dubai skyscrapers. Look at that. They were not able to find a single evidence of our contemporary contribution, but Dubai skyscrapers. So what is the dilemma? What is the main issue? The main issue is that the mosque is a very unique building. It's the house of God. It's Baytullah. It's the place where we want to be as close as we can to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And therefore, it's related to our ideology, it's related to our existence. But at the same time, it should be a representation of evolving community. It should be a representation of a community that is living in the 21st century. And it also should be a representation of the dynamic identity that I talked about, not the identity which is frozen in time. So my narrative is that I will try to sort of construct a platform that would help to create a different kind of interaction between the building, the mosque, and the cultural, social, urban, and architectural context. In the two contexts, the Western and also the Eastern cultures. And this is what I would call it the alternative kind of approach. And this approach is kind of a different proposition regarding designing mosque and also regarding the whole value of architecture and urbanism in our contemporary time, and particularly as Muslims. So it's literally about providing some new kind of perception of the mosque, and it's related to people in different generations and also to the community. Now, it's also interesting to see how people are perceiving Islam and perceiving the mosque as a representation of Islam. And this is why I called it this scary journey from Islamophobia, the phenomena, and then how this phenomena goes all the way to the physical representation of God's place, to the physical representation of Islam, which is the mosque, and this is why I called it the Moscophobia. Now, Islamophobia in itself was generated particularly because of the 9/11, or I would say amplified because of that, and we started to have waves of hate against whatever is related to Islam. Although Islam was in a position to defend that we have the highest degrees of tolerance, and that tolerance is deeply rooted in the ideology of Islam. So Islamophobia is about fear, it's about prejudice, hatred, and so on and so forth. But what is interesting here, that we were under the impression that Islamophobia was constructed in the West. But ironically, this phenomena also is locally constructed. There are a lot of examples and a lot of situations and a lot of turning points in the contemporary time of this nation, suggesting that some leaders, some dictatorships, whatever, they also enjoy the idea of dealing with Islam as an enemy, because this would help them to control more. So as I said here, it's also locally constructed and globally consumed. Islam also is about diversity. It's about multiculturalism, and it's about dialogue. But we were not able to put a lot of effort in amplifying those values and showing literally that we are so much excited, and Muslims are coming from all over the world, because it's a global ideology. Another interesting thing when you sort of research the phenomena of Islamophobia, that you will see what I would call it the other voices, the honest writers and researchers who were able to see that Islamophobia is used as a tool, and it's used as an industry, and it's used to create this culture of fear, right? So this is also something that I would call, it's part of our duty, that we have to respect those other voices that helping us and helping the world to shed light on the pragmatic dimension of the phenomenon. And then we started to have a different kind of fear, which is fear from mosques, right? Now, what is interesting in this phenomena, that all the main fundamental components of the architectonics of the mosque was used, or were used, to represent this kind of fear. The minarets, the dome, the hilal, and so on and so forth. So the whole form, the whole image was kind of rejected. And we have protests all over Europe and some of the states also suggesting that we need to stop designing mosques. We need to stop building mosques in the West. So it's becoming really a huge phenomenon, particularly in the Western community. And because of the idea that the mosque is the physical representation of Islam, and we don't want such representation to be within the fabric of our communities and cities. So this is happening all over the place, and some of the mosques were vandalized and so on. Not only that, it's very interesting. I will go back to this whole notion of how Islamophobia is also locally constructed, right? So this is a training drill of the fighting terrorism somewhere in Cairo, Egypt. And they have used a model of a mosque as if consciously or subconsciously the intention is to shape the collective conscious towards this is the center of terrorism. If we want to train our soldiers to fight terrorism, we have to do that against the representation of Islam, which is a mosque. So this is intentionally, or it's not intentionally, consciously, or it's not consciously, but this is the message that would stay in our collective conscious. Interestingly, the very first representation of Islam after 9/11 was dramatically ultra-modern building. It has nothing to do with the form, the typical form of the mosque. Multi-story building with a very, very liberal interpretation of Islam. So the whole center is about dialogue, places for people to meet, lecture rooms, praying hall, and so on and so forth. But the rejection was incredible. It was very hard to pass the project because of this Islamophobia/moscophobia. And even cartoons were all over the place to suggest that this is the kind of a very dangerous situation to have, to allow such a building to be constructed blocks away from 9/11 site. I think also we have a contemporary challenge. Because if we go to history, we will realize that Islam was incredible in terms of interacting with different cultures. And Muslims, they had this, I would say, even talent of being integrated with different culture and be affected by those kind of cultural differences. Not only culture, even the notion of geography, the politics, the economical dimensions, and so on and so forth. But we are in a contemporary situation now where, number one, it's a very challenging time. Sometimes it's even challenged to say that you are a Muslim or I am a Muslim because of this chattered image, right? So it seems to me that this is also putting more responsibility on our shoulders, particularly if we are architects and urban designers and urban planners, if we are the one responsible for shaping those environments that would represent Islam in this contemporary time, and given the fact that we have this shattered image, what kind of answers would come up with? And as I said, the whole beauty of Islam is that it was a journey through our different kind of cultures and geographies and localities. And in all of these places, it was a beautiful, beautiful kind of a melting pot that ended up with creative works in different places. So the whole, as I said here, and Sayyid Nasr also wrote a beautiful statement regarding this idea of beauty and how beauty was related to the creative process in different geographies around the Islamic world. And this idea of beauty also is very interesting if you look at it from a very philosophical point of view. Because beauty of Islam is not only related to the physical beauty, but it's also related to the inner beauty. This notion of al-zahir and al-batin, which is also very interesting when it comes to architecture. So it's not about skin deep kind of treatment. It's not about a facade. It's not about a sort of ornamentation. It's about experience. It's about how you would feel within a mosque, how you would feel around the mosque, and so on and so forth. So the mosque is a manifestation of beauty, and it's also a product of creativity. So the notion of creativity also is fundamentally important. If we would resort to the idea of the mosque is basically a room with a dome and a minaret, we killed creativity. And we proved to a lot of people around the world that we are frozen in time. We were not able to produce. We were not able to contribute. We were not able to add something to the creative project of the whole world. And we have a lot of platforms, and we have learned that from wonderful examples all over the world. The notion of geometry, the notion of form, the quality of light. I did a lot of research regarding mosque buildings regulations in the Middle East. And whenever it comes to the notion of light, nothing is related to the beauty of the natural light, not only in terms of lighting the space, but in terms of allowing light to contribute to the sacredness of the place. This is also very, very important, that the regulations when it comes to contemporary mosques, we are talking about very pragmatic issues. We're not talking about the spiritual experience that people should have within the spaces of the mosque. And the notion of calligraphy and water and so on and so forth. All of these kind of wonderful examples that we have seen in our history, we were not able to produce it, we cannot produce it, we are a bit lazy about doing that, or we keep on repeating this, we were not able to have our own new contribution. And this would lead me to the whole notion of our understanding of the concept of creativity. And as a lot of people talked about this, that Islamic art, as Ali Grabar said in his wonderful book, Formation of Islamic Art, he was talking particularly about this notion of creativity and creativity as a responsibility from the artist. And then also how artists and architects relate this to their relation to God. So even the act of doing a piece of art was also in itself a spiritual exercise. And you can see this in the diversity of Islamic architecture, and particularly mosques all over the place. You would notice that wherever you go, there is an impact of the geography, there is an impact of the locality, the impact of materials, the impact even of the sense of beauty within this specific community. So you have radical differences. but at the same time you have a lot of things related to the essence of Islam. So in this sense, I would invite you to differentiate between the timeless quality and the timeless images. And I think in some situation we confuse the two. I think it's fundamentally important in our contemporary time to differentiate between the timeless quality of Islamic architecture, the timeless qualities that should be generated within the design of the mosque, versus the images of the mosque or the images of Islamic art. Because images would suggest that we are static, but qualities would suggest dynamism. Another very interesting thing about Islam and how Islam is related to the built environment is that you would notice that Islam is so much related to the notion of knowledge. And particularly in the urbanity of the Muslim community, everything is related to the whole notion of knowledge. Different forms of knowledge are manifested in spaces and places. Masjid, madrasa, kulliya, souq, khan, caravanserais, all of these building types were related to either formally or informally to the notion of knowledge share. Education, formal kind of manifestation of knowledge, but also you have knowledge transfer, debates, globalized culture, because all of these places were literally global places, people coming from all over the place. And then the idea of human exposure, and this is why we used to have incredible tolerance, because we meet people from all over the world. So you know the differences, you were raised to respect differences. Another interesting thing about the notion of the mosque in relation to the urban fabric, in the urban context, is that the mosque was never treated as a single building. This is a very contemporary modern notion. The mosque is part of the city. The mosque is part of the neighborhood. The mosque is part of our daily life. And therefore, you will see that this interesting triology between the building, the public space, and the market. The masjid, was saha, was souq. Very, very interesting triology. And therefore, there is very strong bond between the community and the mosque. Another interesting thing also that was depicted in a lot of the Orientalist drawings, the life in and around the mosque. So the mosque was literally a center of life. It's not related to rituals. It's not related to Salat al-Zuhr and Salat al-Asr. It's related to life. And therefore, within the spaces of the mosque and on the edges of the mosque, a lot of representations of how life is taking place. People are reading, people are eating, people are talking, people are socializing in and around the mosque. And the souq was part of this also, because the souq is also a representation of urban diversity. And within the souq, you can see it also as a knowledge transfer and a social integration. Remember that the souq, the traditional souq, was a place for production. It was not Marks and Spencer. It was not Zara that you go and buy something. The traditional souq was about being engaged in a creative process to produce something. So you would see the artisan, you would see people working, you would see people producing, and therefore, again, consciously or subconsciously, you will be engaged in a knowledge transfer experience. Now, it seems to me that we have a fundamental crisis. And the major aspect of this crisis is that we abandoned our creative process. We abandoned our creative responsibility. We resorted to the very easy solution, which is, let's keep on repeating the history. Let's keep on doing one more Uthmani, one more Mamluki or a mosque, right? So we keep on producing the same model again and again. But what is more alerting is that we need also to differentiate between being traditional and being original and being creative. Because being traditional doesn't mean that you are original. It doesn't mean that you are creative. Because you can be traditional in a very fake manner, right? So it's not about copying and pasting. It's not about, as I said before, the skin kind of treatment of a specific facade to represent this Islamic identity. This is the quality of mosques that we are producing now. In everything, not necessarily, it doesn't matter where, but wherever you go in the Middle East, you will see examples like that, right? You would question what are the references. You would question the notion of beauty. You would question the whole notion of the Zahir and al-Batin. You would question the notion of creativity. You will notion the relation between the building and the community. You will question the notion of where is life in this mosque. But all of these mosques are lifeless because they were only created for rituals. They were only created for the 15 minutes of the praying time. Some of them actually will close the doors after praying. They open it in the Asr, and then they close it again, and then they open it in the Maghrib. And then sometimes architects are incredibly creative here, as you can see here. So sky's the limit when it comes to the definition of ugly mosques and offending your spirituality. If you would accept my argument regarding that going to the mosque, it's not only about performing the rituals, but it's about immersing yourself in a spiritual experience. Show me how those buildings would help you to be engaged in such profound spiritual experience. This is a very interesting mosque in Singapore called Al-Nahda, and it seems like a very modern building. It seems to me, I really was trying to communicate with the architect, because it's a kind of building that can be a mall, administrative building, headquarters for a bank. But suddenly the architect realized that it's a mosque. So he put a small Kaaba, if you can notice that, right? According to my research, nobody is performing Hajj there, so we're happy about this. But yeah, he did insert a small Kaaba in the middle of the mosque, hoping that this would be the representation of Islam. Another interesting thing about the Middle East is that we love mega mosques. And not only we love mega mosques, we love also to name the mega mosques. So this is Al-Rahman Mosque, built by Saddam Hussein, unfinished mosque, giant one, right? And then Al-Saleh Mosque by Ali Abdullah Saleh in Yemen. Huge mosque, mega mosque. And then you question, what is the value of having a mosque like that? If 80% of your country, the population of your country, are under the poverty rate, poverty line, they cannot afford to have clean water, they cannot go to schools, they cannot be treated in a decent hospital. What is the value of this? Sheikh Zayed, every one of those mosques, they compete, those leaders compete to say the biggest in the Middle East. They love this, the biggest mosque in the Middle East. And this is the recent one and the most ironic one. Because this one called Al-Fattah Al-Alim, and it was built literally in the middle of the desert. And again, they said it's the biggest in the Middle East. But this one is interesting because they were not able to find people to pray in it. So they started to do caravans with soldiers coming from different military camps in Egypt to go and, as you can see in the picture here, to perform in the Friday prayers. This is the whole story? No. Even in Kaaba, even in Mecca. This is a beautiful, beautiful painting that was done in the early 18th century. And it's in a museum in Turkey, Istanbul, Turkey. And you see how the Kaaba was dominating the whole image of Mecca. everything around Kaaba was so humble, was so down to earth. There is a beautiful understanding of the value of this, the most sacred spot on earth. And all the people here are so primitive. No architects, no urban designers, no Western planners, but they had this authentic understanding of the value of Islam and the value of the Kaaba. And this is what we're doing now, right? This is my book, which is criticizing the whole urban development around Kaaba. But look, from interacting with Kaaba to looking over Kaaba, this is painful. This is really painful. And then what is the final result? This is the final result. And they still keep on doing projects and skyscrapers and hotels and malls and so on and so forth, right? And then where is Kaaba? It's becoming very marginalized. It's not important. But this, the new liberal kind of manifestation of the globalization, if I would say that, is fundamentally more important. Now, let's move to building mosques in the West. If we learn anything from history, we have learned that Islam, the beauty of Islam, in its journey in a lot of geographies around the world, respected the locality, respected the geography, respected the meaning of beauty in this specific geography. And therefore, if you look at any architectural history book, you will be amazed with the diversity of shapes of Muslim architecture in different communities. And this is why I like very much, instead of saying Islamic architecture, I would go for architecture of Muslim communities, because it suggests this distinction from location to location. But then when we go to build in the West, we build exactly the same kind of buildings as if we are building in Doha or Cairo in Baghdad. Why? This is a different locality. Why we create barriers between the mosque and the community, right? If I ask any one of you, where is this mosque? The visual expression, the minarets, the dome, the whole articulation of the buildings, the windows, and so on and so forth, I will put my money that no one will be able to say that it's in Michigan, it's in USA. Now relate this to the notion of Moscophobia. Even without considering the whole notion of Islamophobia and the fear from Islam and whatever, why we are imposing mosques in the context of Western communities and Western cities and so on and so forth. Why we are not using the mosque to be a sort of a catalyst for a dialogue, right? And this is why, if you couple again, if you go back again to the notion of Islamophobia, it's kind of logical to have all of these again, rejection to Islam and rejection to the presentation of Islam as such. And therefore, a lot of mosques are vandalized in Europe. More than 135 mosques in a single year, because they feel that this is an outsider building. It doesn't belong to us. It's not talking to us. A mosque should talk to the community, should create a dialogue, right? Now let me show you some examples of the sort of the alternative regional cases and also global cases. That was an interesting proposition for a mosque called the Vanishing Mosque in Dubai. And I like it because suddenly the whole performance of the Salah, the whole performance of the prayer became in the public space and exposed to the rest of the urban fabric of the city. So the mosque is suggesting that the boundary, the blurred line between the mosque and the city, or between the mosque and the rest of the urban fabric, is kind of blurred, and intentionally he was trying to get rid of this. another interesting mosque in Saudi Arabia, and I like the idea here of focusing on the spiritual experience within the mosque, and also looking at those fundamental elements like the minarets, the volume of the mosque, the main mass, and so on and so forth, and revisit all of this in a more contemporary manner. Mosques also are about simplicity, as I said, right? So again, very, very interesting examples from Bangladesh. But look at that. The play of light makes this neighborhood mosque a refugee for spirituality. This is a beautiful quality. And for the architect to be alert that this is his or her role, in this case, her role. This is by far more important than thinking about the height of the minaret, or what kind of ornamentation I would use, or what kind of arch I would refer to. No, the most important thing is to create something simple that would talk to the community. People would feel that they can subscribe to it, they can attach themselves to it. But amazingly, you go inside and it's a beautiful spiritual place. The whole notion of simplicity, the quality of light, and so on and so forth. No one would even imagine that this box, as some people were telling me, how come they didn't give her the award? But yes, because you're saying that using your own criteria. But if you use more profound criteria like the quality of the place and how the quality of the place would enhance the spiritual experience, this is radically different kind of criteria. Look at that. Look at the quality of the place and how this quality of the place would enhance your spiritual experience and sacred experience within the mosque. Another interesting example suggesting that whenever you go to a different locality, you will allow this context to have its own impact, its own values, its own say. So this is again a beautiful example in Jakarta, Indonesia. And this is the mosque. Blending with the context, blending with the architecture, blending with the garden. So kids are playing and then they pray and then they go back to picnics and so on and so forth. So the mosque is simple, is a presentation of the community. It's related to the life of people. And on top of all of that, it's still a creative work. And the architect was able to insert again some signature of his or her own identity and creativity in the place. At Zayaf Mosque in Singapore also, it's a very, very modern look building, but I would again emphasize the whole notion of the spiritual experience, and particularly the element of light, and how the light is penetrating the spaces in a very profound manner. The Islamic Forum in Binzburg in Germany. This is an Islamic center in Bavaria, Germany. But this is a very, very interesting example, because the whole main facade of the mosque is made of glass. Very transparent mosque. Remember the art installation that I started my presentation with? And I talked about the whole notion of transparency. Now this mosque is based on this concept. We want the building we are building a mosque in the West, in the heart of Germany. Why we have to surround it with walls? It's not hot, it's not Doha. So maybe allowing this visual dialogue to take place will change the perception of the people about Islam and about Muslims. And maybe ultimately would invite people even to be integrated with the place and visit the place. Right? Another important example is also related to the spatial experience. How we create spaces within the mosque. Why the mosque is rectangular? Why the only kind of addition to the geometry, the geometrical articulation of the space would be related to the dome? Why we are not considering the whole space of the mosque as a representation of creativity, as a representation of an interesting form, as a representation of a space that would stimulate you, that would provoke questions in your mind. This is the message of Islam. Islam is about questioning things. It's about أَفَلَا تَتَفَقَّهُونَ أَفَلَا تُفَكِّرُونَ, right? Sometimes also in designing mosques, we are not excited about the journey to the mosque, because we all drive Land Cruisers, right? So we take the Land Cruiser, park, and go into the mosque. But that was not the case in traditional communities. That was not the case in all of the cities around the Islamic world, because the journey to the mosque is even sacred. But we are not considering this. So this is one of the very interesting examples in Turkey, where the whole journey to them, although the mosque is almost embedded underground, but yet it's very spiritual. Because the architect and the urban designer, they work together, and the landscape designer also, they work together to create a sacred journey. So you will go through beautiful spaces and places, and you will end up in the most sacred place of the mosque. The place that I really like is in Albania, where the notion here was about a conceptual shift from having the mosque in the open space to having the open space as the heart of the mosque, and all the other activities are surrounding this, right? So suddenly you have sort of the mosque itself as a public place, and you create this by inviting people to be interacted in different activities around the edges of the mosque. And you name it, people are reading, eating, praying, talking, socializing, and so on and so forth. So again, those are the kind of conceptual paradigms that would allow the mosque to be part of the city, and part of the community, and part of our daily life, as opposed to it's a place to perform rituals. Beautiful articulation, but again, it's a mosque. How about that? It looks like a spaceship. It's not settled on the ground. It will fly, damn it. If you guys can read Arabic, it's a bit tough in Arabic. But those are the comments of 3 professors of architecture. One of them is claiming that he is a professor of Islamic architecture, very well known. The third one is Egyptian, of course, right? Ironically, they are describing a building that they only saw a couple of images of this building. They've never been into it. They've never been around it. They've never been within it. But yet, they were able to say all of this. Which building they're talking about? You guys know?
The last words. The only futuristic one.
Sorry?
The only futuristic one.
Here you go. They're talking about here. They're talking about us. Yeah, they're talking about us. Right, they're talking about us. They saw a picture like that and they kept on saying all what I showed you before. Why? Because they still very much dominated with the image, not the quality. Remember my slide in Sultan Hassan, the timeless quality and the timeless image? There are professors of architecture, but they are trapped in the image. They were not able to free themselves from the image and talk about quality. Because if they are really talking quality and discussing quality, they would realize that the design concept of this mosque is about reviving the whole notion of the school, the madrasa, the kulliyah. This is a contemporary representation of Islam, contemporary representation of our identity. No one would claim that this maybe 17th century, 18th century, no one would be, remember my slide about the old and new? No one would be able to say that this is a historical building. This is a building, a product of our contemporary time. the triology, the mosque, the human, and knowledge, and I will elaborate upon this in a minute. And then the notion of creativity. There is a responsibility. The architect team of this building, they have a clear understanding of their role as creative people, and they have to have their own creative signature. So you end up with a building that literally stimulates your mind, literally invite you to ask questions, right? And therefore the building itself, and I would claim that, the building itself is becoming an educational tool, right? You look at the geometry. We talked about the geometry before. If you look at the complexity of Sultan Hassan plan, for instance, and you see the geometry there, and then you compare it to this, I would say it as a continuation. But each geometry, it's representing its age, its technology, its advancement, its science. You look at the quality of places in and around the mosque and how people are gathered in those kind of places in a very harmonious manner. Or even the internal spaces. Again, very inviting, very stimulating, new and contemporary and updated. And then people again enjoy it. And I did a lot of interviews in here, and people felt that this is unique spiritual experience. The element of light and the roofs and the notion of the new form of mihrab and so on and so forth. And the whole visuality of the minarets. We know now for maybe 7-8 decades that the minaret, it's not about muaddin going up the ladder to call for prayer. It's a more symbolic thing. So if it's symbolic, sky's the limit when it comes to creativity. Because the minaret is about a representation of a symbol rather than a functional element. And then even if you go more towards the narrative of symbols, you would realize also that they have used those 5 pillars to suggest the 5 pillars of Islam, and to remind you, using some of the Quranic verses to also contemplate on that. But what is more exciting for me, and this is why I love this place, and I love to inject energy in this place, that's not only a mosque, and it's not only a kulliyah, it's a very comprehensive entity. Because you have the exhibition places, you have the library, you have the cafeteria, you have the auditorium like here where you can have public lectures and knowledge transfer and so on and so forth. And you have the courtyards. So in this sense, you have a full experience, and all of this is also attached to a public space and a garden and a green area. So it's not, definitely, this is not the kind of place about a door that you would open, go inside, do the Dhuhr prayer or the Asr prayer and leave. So to make a long story short, I would suggest that my conclusion would be a sort of envisioning a sort of a new paradigm. And this paradigm basically is in the East or in the West, we should move from this Eastern mosques or Western mosques to mosques on the East or mosques in the West. And this means that we are suggesting respecting the context and creating a dialogue between the mosque and the context. Another important issue is how to consider the mosque as a place for the community. And also emphasis on the spiritual